Hello, everyone. We are joined today by a very special guest and friend of the podcast, Wendell Ferreira. He's a sports writer, contributor with AtoZSports and a few other places. As Packer fans, if you don't know him yet, you should. He writes a lot about quick hitting articles for the Packers and just talks about the team in general. And that's what we'll be doing today. It's great to talk with you again, Wendell. Thanks for being here.
Appreciate you guys inviting me. How are you guys doing? Let's talk some ball. Let's talk some Packers.
Yeah, looking forward to digging in and get your opinions. One thing I love about you, Wendell, and we said it leading up to this episode, is that you have great opinions and you're not afraid to share them, and we're ready to get those out there and share them with Packer Universe.
I appreciate you. Sometimes it's hard to. Packers fans sometimes are a little bit defensive about how I talk about the team, but I try to be honest. If I think what they're doing is right, I'll tell you. And if I don't like it as much, I'll tell you too.
Again, that's what I love that personally about you, Wendell. I really do. I love your takes, and you're not shy about exactly that. When you don't like it, you put it out there, and some people might be a little bit offended by it, but sometimes that's the reality too.
The good thing is sometimes I'm wrong. So
it's okay to be wrong too. Absolutely.
Yeah, we love that about you, Wendell. Thank you. We don't really tend to pull our punches either. We have kind of strong opinions that we'd like to put out there. We're cordial and nice to everybody. We even have some people from friends now from the Lions fans and a Bears contributor, sports contributor, would come on the show, and we like to poke fun with each other. But it's great having your perspective. From halfway around the world. I love it. You have great content, and we love your opinions on the Packers for sure. It's been a while. We've had you on at the end of August last year before the start of the season, but a lot has changed and happened since then. Obviously, notably, going into the 2025 season. So let's start there. We had free agency. We had two notable signings with Hobbs and Banks. So I wanted to ask you about those two. What do you think about them? And then you can go right into maybe even draft. What was your overall take of the draft? Do you think that went well for the Packers?
Yeah, in regards to free agency, the Packers signed those big two guys, and I think for the most part, both got bigger contracts than most analysts were projecting. But I think especially Banks, I think it was a huge overpay because it's a lot of money. It's I think 17 million a year. And it's a real contract. It's not funny money. It's not a lot of funny money. So that, and I don't think Banks is an elite guard or anything close to it. I think it's more he's an average starter. Not saying that's not important to have an average starter, especially along the offensive line. I think he'll have a nice role for the team. He'll start at left guard. It's important because they were losing Josh Myers. In the aggregate, I think the Packers' plan is to moving Elton Jenkins to center. The process is, I think they hope to get as good at left guard as they were and better at center. But I think the price they paid to Banks is probably too much based on what Banks has shown so far. The thing about the Packers in terms of free agency is that they always try to sign guys they think can get better. That's why they usually sign guys in their second contracts because Banks is going into his second contract in the NFL. He's still relatively young. So based on what he's shown so far in the NFL, that's a lot of money. And I personally wouldn't have done that. But I think it makes sense in regards that the Packers think he can get better and they have a plan for it. So maybe you can ask yourself if the Packers deserve the benefit of the doubt in terms of free agency and offensive line. They probably do, but that's a lot of money still. Hobbs is a different case because I think it was maybe a slight overpay in comparison to what had been projected for his market, but the Packers desperately needed a corner, and I think he has that versatility that the Packers would prefer. He can play inside, outside, and the Packers needed that versatility to build the cornerback room, especially because back in March when the Packers signed him, the overall expectation was that the Packers would end up in parting ways with Jair Alexander. Now the things have changed a little bit, but I think for the most part, I like the Hobbs signing. and I wouldn't have done what they did for Banks.
You beg a question there with Jair. I'm kind of on the fence still if this thing gets worked out. Kind of where are you at with this? I know obviously they get some more cap savings after June 1, which has already happened. If they still go that route, he is reported to be coming to mandatory minicamp next week. We hear things in the background where maybe they're working on a restructure, but nothing's come to fruition at this point. Where do you think this thing ultimately ends up with Jair?
Yeah, if there's one thing that Brian Gutekunst does really well for the Packers, is that he doesn't make decisions before he has to make it. So I think he's waiting for the right opportunity to present itself. Maybe that's restructuring the contract, and Matt Neidham reported that there's an offer on the table. And I would say Jair probably wants a better deal. And at the same time, I think the Packers would still be open to trading him. This is not a report. This is a perception that I have about the situation. If someone is willing to part ways with a draft pick to take the entire of his contract, I think the Packers will gladly take it, because I think it's a huge financial circumstance around it, because the Packers have the cap situation next year is not as comfortable as they would like. Probably they are already over the cap, and they have something like under 50 players under contract. So the financial situation is certainly a problem for the Packers moving forward. If there's a way to get some compensation for Jair, I think the Packers would still do it. But I don't. It seems like Gutekunst doesn't want to release him without any type of compensation. So I think Gutekunst is kind of waiting to see if there's an opportunity, if someone's willing to take Jair's contract. Jair doesn't want to take a pay cut to go elsewhere. If it's go elsewhere, maybe he prefers to be cut, and I think it makes sense because he would choose his next destination. So it's a complicated situation because it has several layers. But I think we have a kind of a soft deadline next week with mandatory minicamp, because it's a risk for the Packers to allow Jair to practice without a situation more defined. Because let's say he goes to practice and the Packers can't say no because he's under contract. If he wants to practice, the Packers have to allow him to practice. Let's say he gets injured. Now the entirety of his contract is guaranteed because the Packers can't cut him, and the Packers won't have him on the field. So that's kind of a worst case scenario. So I think the Packers have to. I don't think they have to make a decision next week, but it would be prudent maybe to have a resolution for this by next week.
Wow, yeah, that's a good point about OTA. I mean, sorry, mandatory minicamp. That's a good calendar marking there, and something's going to happen. And I guess with the cornerback situation, they didn't really address it in the draft. They picked up a depth person that took a flyer on with Micah. But I guess, what was your overall feeling about the draft? Do you think they picked up pieces to fill in where they needed? And then I guess, looking out into the next few years, did they acquire some good depth?
Yeah, I think in terms of the process, it's hard to know for sure, right, about the draft because the players haven't hit the field yet. But what I try to do in this time between the draft and the season is I try to analyze the process. And I think in terms of process, the Packers did a good job because they acquired players from premium positions for the most part. The possibility of the surplus value with the wide receiver position is massive. The guys from Over the Cap made a study earlier this year, and the average for first round pick wide receiver since 2020 is a 20 million surplus value throughout the rookie contract. 20 million in 4 years. That's massive. And that's the average. That counts the bad players too, because if you get it right, it's much higher than that. So I think the Packers did a good job taking a wide receiver. I'm not sure that Matthew Golden would have been the ideal fit for the offense. I think we can question that. And I think a big question for the Packers is how they will use Golden and Jaden Reed together. because both are shorter players. I think they play kind of different roles within the offense because Reed is that classic slot receiver, and I think Golden will be more of the that Z receiver. But Golden will probably have to block because Reed doesn't, so that's a consideration to make. But for the most part, I think Golden is an excellent player. He's probably ready to contribute in some degree to the offense. So I think it was a good selection in the first round, especially considering who was on the board. I think the Packers were not as comfortable with the corners, which would be maybe a bigger need. But I think in terms of process, taking a wide receiver early was a good process. And if you go through the entire class, they get a tackle in the second round. Then another wide receiver in Savion Williams in the third. They got an edge defender. Uh, Colin Oliver is maybe a hybrid edge linebacker. So you can see the value everywhere through the seventh round when they took Micah Robinson the corner. So in terms of process, I think the Packers did a good job. Now in terms of fit, especially with the wide receivers, I think we have to wait and see how it will shake out.
Do you have a couple favorites from that draft? If you had to pick two, your maybe two favorite players they took, and what was your overview all the way down in Brazil of this thing going off in Green Bay, Wisconsin?
Yeah, it was awesome from that perspective because it's funny because as I mentioned in the other time I was here, I feel the warmth in the Wisconsin people, right? From because they are huge, not only Packers fans, but football fans, and they enjoy the process and the atmosphere of it all. So it was so beautiful to watch from afar. I was kind of bummed that I couldn't go there because it would have been an amazing experience for sure. But I'm sure that I will still have an opportunity to any time to go to Lambeau. And about the preferred player, I think Baron Sorrell was my preferred pick. I love him as a person. I think you can see. Uh, Obviously, I don't know him personally, but from afar and the things we read and just watching his press conferences, he's such a nice guy. And I think the value of that pick in the fourth round as a developmental player at that position, I think it was massive for the Packers. We were kind of bummed that the Packers didn't invest more at the edge position, but I think Sorrell is certainly a valuable decision for the Packers. That I love him as a player too. I think his tape is super nice to see. I think he's a great fit for Jeff Hafley's defense because he's a heavier edge rusher, and I think he works for the type of player that the Packers tend to like, both the front office with Gutekunst, but I think it makes sense for Jeff Hafley too, because over this first Jeff Hafley season, we kind of see the difference between what Gutekunst tend to prefer and what would work within Hafley's defense. And I think, for example, Brenton Cox is a lighter edge rusher, and he worked so well for the defense. But I think Sorrell has that speed and power at the same time to make it work within Hafley's scheme too.
Yeah, he seems to have a few things in his bag already as an edge rusher. Yeah, as you mentioned, that was unfortunately, Tay and I did get to take in day one and day two, Thursday, Friday. We missed that great Baron Sorrell moment in Green Bay. What a moment for him being there, choosing to be there. So we really look forward to that pick. And I think, obviously, with Enigbari going out after the 25 season, they really did some – and JJ's played moderately okay, but I think they definitely upgraded there with Sorrell as a comparable to Enigbari.
Mm-hmm.
But that said, when you look at this team from, a 10,000-foot view, do you have, certain position groups, a position in general that concern you? Do you have players that you say, hey, if this team really wants to compete in the NFC, really go far, are there a couple guys that stand out to you that you need to see them take that next step in the 2025 season?
Yeah, I think the Packers have a pretty solid roster overall. I think from 1 to 90, I think it's hard to be as good as the Packers are because they've had so many picks over the past few drafts. I think since 2020 they have had like 60 picks, and I think it's by far the most in the NFL. It's something like that. So it makes sense that the roster depth will be good, right? Because they've had so many picks. But I think specifically about this year's roster, The only position that would concern me in terms of depth is corner, because they're probably one injury away from maybe having some real problems. Even though I think they project Javon Bullard as a nickel corner, so maybe they would have, even if let's say Jair is out, let's not count him on the team. They probably play Hobbs and Nixon in the boundary and Bullard inside. I like Valentine a lot. I think he would maybe be a better boundary option, but I think they prefer Hobbs and Nixon outside and Bullard inside. And they have these four playable corners. And I think that they have a little bit, they changed their stance in how important cornerback is. Not that the position isn't important, but maybe that being top heavy is not as important as maybe it is a weak link system. So I think that their concern at the cornerback group is maybe to get some competent players from 1 to 5 maybe. And if Jair is on the roster, they have those 5 guys, counting Jair and Bullard, to make it a reasonable situation. And I think for the most part, that's the only position that I have real concerns about. But at the same time, I think the Packers truly lack blue chip talent, because if you look around the roster, who are the blue chip players? Maybe I would say Josh Jacobs, Xavier McKinney, and if Jordan Love takes maybe a step forward, he can be that. I don't see Rashan Gary as a blue chip player anymore. I think he's more of a kind of a red chip player, and don't I don't know if he has that upside and developmental path to be a blue chip player anymore. But I think the Packers truly lacks a blue chip talent, and hopefully Golden can become that. But at this point, obviously it's hard to know before he even take the field. So I think for the most part, that's what preclude them from maybe taking a step forward last year. It's because going from bad to good, it's easier than going from good to great in the NFL. So I think to make that step, you probably have some great players, and I don't think the Packers have them.
Hmm. Interesting. No, like you talk about blue chip players and maybe lack of them. Um, can you name off the top of your head a couple players that maybe needs to take that step from the red chip to the blue chip that are on the roster now?
Yeah, that's hard. I think maybe the most reasonable and realistic option would be Adrian Cooper, the linebacker, because I think he has real star potential. Even though I don't think the linebacker position is as valuable in terms of wins above replacement and all that stuff. I think when you have a great linebacker, it makes a real impact on the team. And I think we've seen that with 49ers and Fred Warner, and they play a similar system to the Packers with Halfley. So if Adrian Cooper can have that type of impact, I don't see him as a Michael Parsons moving to edge player, but I think as an off-ball linebacker, if he can take that step and be a real contributor, a real blue chip player, and a full-time player, because he barely played half the snaps last year. If he can be on the field more, and they're super excited about how stronger he is and how faster he is, I think it's realistic to think to project that he'll be a blue chip player moving forward, and I expect huge things from him. I think Cooper is exactly what the Packers hoped Quay Walker would be, and isn't, and Adrian Cooper can truly be that.
I agree. That was my favorite pick of the previous draft, and when they took him, I told Tay that was the guy I wanted, and they did, and I was over the moon about it. So I really do expect that second year jump. And the Packers always do this thing with these draft picks that they bring him along slow, and I was just waiting, and then finally they unleashed him, midseason thereon, and what a boon for him, and then putting on the weight here, going into the 2025 season. Yeah, you really expect some really big things. One of the guys I heard you speak about, is he not? And this has kind of been a talking point in Northeast Wisconsin among the beat and other things in the slow time of the football year, even though OTAs are going on in the second week here, is everyone's saying it's a big year for Jordan. Many people saying obviously his 2024 season, he regressed. Obviously there were some injury pieces in there. Give us your 100-foot overview of Jordan, what you'd like to see him do, what what you thought maybe held him back in 24, and where you see that ceiling if he can get there.
Yeah, I think Jordan Love's quote unquote regression was much more circumstantial than actually a performance regression, because he was injured for most of the season. And if you look at his numbers from weeks 11 through 17, which was probably the only time of the year that he was really healthy, he was pretty good. He was awesome. He was elite.
Yep.
So I think Jordan is truly a top 10 talent at his position. And I truly believe he can be an elite quarterback still. I don't think he's Aaron Rodgers. I don't think he's Brett Favre, and he doesn't need to be honest. But I think he can be an excellent quarterback for the Packers. If you look at last year, it's easy to see the numbers and say that there was some type of regression because he threw more picks per game and fewer touchdowns, fewer yards. But if you look at how much his wide receivers hindered him all season long with drops and mistakes, you can see the numbers, and you can see that the Packers wide receivers, they were the worst group in terms of making mistakes for the quarterback, especially on third and fourth downs. So that's huge in all, and that's something that's hard to quantify, because if you look the volume numbers and even the advanced numbers, if the guy drops the ball, it affects the quarterback's EPA too. So you have to truly go through more individual numbers and trying to parse what is the quarterback, what's the receiver, what's the offensive line. And what I like the most about Jordan Love is that he truly elevates his environment. And that's you sometimes you maybe not, it's hard to see, but the offensive line especially, I think the Packers have they have a well coached team, and the offensive line in particularly is well coached too. But it's not exactly a talented group, because Rashid Walker is a fine starter. He's not a top elite left tackle. Elton Jenkins had a super up and down season last year. Josh Myers was below average center, so much that he doesn't have a starting job now. Sean Ryan is also an average starter at best. And I think the only Packers offensive lineman that's truly an elite player is Zach Tom. And even though they are well coached, Jordan Love makes them look much better than they are because of his ability to avoid sacks, to avoid pressure. And if you look at Love's pressure to sack ratio, it's super amazing. It's super elite, and that's his superpower. It's his ability to avoid sacks, to create plays. Eventually, he will make some mistakes. It's just his style of play. He's not Aaron Rodgers in terms of avoiding mistakes, but I think at the same time, he creates plays that the Rodgers wouldn't. And just because of that, because of his style, he's a different quarterback. Rodgers would throw the ball away, and Love doesn't do that. Love's prefer to try to create. Eventually, it'll create a big play, and eventually it'll lead to mistakes. But give and take, I think the Packers are super well served with Love, and I hope he's healthy all season, because I was at the game when he got hurt, and the surroundings around that, and how you can see Matt LaFleur and the players, they were all so bummed about him, because at that point, right after the game, they were super concerned about his outlook for the season, because they were not sure at that point that he would return in 2024. And he returned. He was not 100%. And when he finally was, he got injured again. And he had like 3 injuries throughout the season. So if he's healthy and the wide receivers help him a little bit more, I would expect absolutely a big season for him.
Yeah. It doesn't help when your receiving group leads the NFL in drops. And, I would imagine you agree with us. You'd love to see a healthy Jordan Love be able to do things on third down with his legs that he just wasn't able to do last year.
Exactly, because if you look at for just as a passer, Love's numbers are super similar to Lamar Jackson's. But the difference is that Lamar adds an element to the game that, first, Love doesn't have as much, and Obviously, nobody does like Lamar, but I think he's an athletic quarterback to some degree, and I think he can add more in that regard. There's a read option that he does against the Lions. I don't know if you guys remember 2 years ago that he runs super fast and it's a big play. And I think the Packers won't design as many runs for Love as they did for Malik Willis, for example. But I
Hmm.
think he can add some level of athleticism to the offense that because it's not a necessarily a slow quarterback or anything like that.
Yeah, I think it could take the offense really far.
Yeah, it seems obvious that this Packers team revolves around Love, but it sounds like I think everyone that watches the Packers knows it doesn't. It's not all on Love's shoulders. This comes down to the offensive line, like you mentioned. This comes down to good defensive play, and obviously the wide receivers and the receiving group as a whole needs to step up. So I don't think it's all on Jordan. I think we all realize that. But yeah, I think he needs to be himself and do what he does. Take more risks than Aaron, of course. That's fun. But not gunslinging it like Favre was, making tons of mistakes. So I think he's a good balance, and it's this year will be interesting to see kind of what he does and how he performs, and who else can elevate themselves. What other position groups can elevate themselves to help him move the Packers forward.
And it's cool because we've seen, and I think that's the benefit of having a really good defensive coordinator in Jeff Hafley, because you can see them switching the investment. Because if you look at the entirety of Rodgers' tenure, the Packers were over investing on defense and not on offense because they trusted Rodgers to elevate the offense. And now they think Hafley can be the guy who will elevate the defense, maybe with lesser talent. And I think that's why they overinvested in the offense this offseason. They signed their big free agent signing was on offense, and their first 3 round draft picks were offensive players too. So I think that's an understanding that yes, Jordan Love is a good quarterback, but he's not Aaron Rodgers, and the NFL is different now too because if you have a consistent offense with talent, that's much more sustainable and reliable year over year than to have a good defense. So if you're gonna overinvest in one unit, I think it's better to overinvest in the offense than defense and build a strong unit around Jordan Love because he is talented. But if you have talent around him, it makes it much easier. And it's not only Love, right? Because if you look around the league at some elite quarterbacks, Joe Burrow is an elite quarterback, but and the Bengals are kind of a cheapy franchise in terms of they don't like to pay guys, and at the same time they're heavily investing in the wide receivers. If you look at the Vikings, how they're building the team around JJ McCarthy, over investing in wide receivers, and they have an okay offensive line, but especially wide receivers now. Analyzing how the NFL works now, it's super important to have wide receivers, to have a strong supporting cast for the offense. I love Matt LaFleur. I think he's one of the maybe 3 or 4 best offensive play callers in football. But if you can add talent, real talent around the quarterback, and to give Matt LaFleur that flexibility on offense, I think it creates it has a potential to create something special for the Packers.
What do you think about the wide receiver room right now? I mean, it's a little crowded now with our obviously returning players and the ones we drafted. I think we all could see 7 on this team, but is that the cap? Like, where do you think the cuts will be? And do you think the room you see now is the room you'll see week 1?
Yeah, that's super interesting because and trying to connect everything I've said now because last year I thought the Packers. I'll go to linebacker room to return to the wide receiver room, and you understand that because last year when the Packers were expected to take a linebacker in the second round, I actually didn't thought they were going to take Adrian Cooper because they had already that real linebacker in Quay Walker, and I expect them to take maybe a middle linebacker, maybe Peyton Wilson or something like that. And they took Adrian Cooper, and he's a big guy. He's a big part of their defense now. So I think that teaches us a lesson that you add talent and you figure out the fit later. And I think that's what they did with Matthew Golden again. I was saying that I don't know how Golden and Reed will fit together, but I think that's a problem that Matt LaFleur will gladly accept, and it's a challenge that he'll make it work. So I think for the most part, the hard part about this is that I don't see the Packers with an X receiver that I'm overly confident in. I think probably their X receiver now is Romeo Dubs, and I think Golden will probably start the season as the Z with Jay Reed in the slot. And I think those three guys will probably start from the get go. I think Golden will probably start over Wicks because I think he's super ready to play. And Weeks had that drop issue, and the Packers trust. They said over and over again that they need to trust the receivers, and Weeks was not that reliable last year with the drop. So I think Golden will end up playing more early on than expected because of that. Because he's a reliable route runner, he has strong hands. So I think maybe he'll have a larger role than expected early on. For the backup guys, because the Packers don't have many X options, I think Malik Heath has a good shot at making the roster because he's outside of Dubs, he's probably their best X receiver on the roster. So I think maybe, and he's also a decent special teamer, so I think they'll keep him. And Watson will probably start the season on the PuP list, so he kind of doesn't count. And I think he's probably the seventh guy that I would keep. I think the Packers will ended up keeping six on the 53 plus Watson. So I think there's a big fight there for the final roster spot between Bo Melton and Miko Hardman. I think those guys will probably fight for a roster spot. And I think it will go down to special teams because at that point, they probably have the chance to cut all those guys, all those three guys, Melton, Hardman, maybe even Heath, and bring them back to the practice squad in some degree. I don't think Gutekunst has been super smart to manage that. He cuts guys, and the guys go through waivers unclaimed and return to the practice squad. Last year, not as much because they lost some guys, but I think they were comfortable with the guys they were losing. So I think he'll manage that super well. I think maybe Bo Melton won't make the roster because they have other guys with more acumen in special teams. So let's see what happens. But I think Melton is under some risk there.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, when you look at it, not even including Watson in the mix, you go Reed, Golden, Wicks, Williams, Dobbs, Heath, Melton, and Hardman. You know, they could end up trading a guy, and let's say it came down to Dobbs or Wicks. You know, from your view, if they decided to trade one, there'd be some value there at the end of training camp. Who would you part ways with, and why?
Yeah, I would trade Dobbs because he's in the last year of his deal, and I think that's a big part of the thing. Because better or worse, Wicks has 2 years left, and I think Wicks also has a higher upside. It's hard to parse how Wicks' career has been because as a rookie he was super productive, super explosive. His ability to create separation is truly awesome. Not only for Packers standards, but he's one of the best separators in the entire NFL. And at the same time, he had a lot of drops last year, obviously, one of the worst wide receivers in the NFL in that regard. But at the same time, drops are super. It's not a sticky stat, right? So if a wide receiver is good at things that are sustainable and bad at things that are not sustainable, that's kind of good to project his performance moving forward. So I think it's hard to know for sure what Wicks is. And as I mentioned before, I think he's a backup on this team right now. But I think at the same time, he has a higher upside than Dubs. And Dubs is entering the final year of his deal. I don't think the Packers will end up paying him because he's an average starter in the NFL. He had those 2 concussions that are something to be concerned about, especially when you're going to pay him, I don't know, Spotrac projects him to get 12 million, 11, 12 million a year. So that's probably a lot of money for an average starter with some injury history. So Dubs is the guy I would trade. I think he would have a decent value in the market for a team, for example, like the Steelers. If they come offering a fourth round pick, maybe I think the Packers would consider it. The problem with that is that Christian Watson is out to start the season. So I think they will keep everyone for now. And if, let's say, by week 6 or 7, Watson has returned and is playing well, I think before the trade deadline, maybe if everyone's playing well, if maybe Golden has had immediate impact as a rookie and Savion Williams has a role, maybe they will consider trading Dubs. But I think by now, before the regular season and before Watson getting healthy, I think it's a little bit harder to make a trade like that.
Appreciate that answer. Thanks for doing that. It's kind of the talking point again. Dead season here, the NFC North, and where you see this team kind of fitting into the mix. Obviously, where they finished last year, but when you take a quick look around, obviously in Minnesota, did some nice things on the D line, adding some things in the offseason. But there's a huge question mark with JJ McCarthy. Chicago always wins the offseason. We know they're champs, and then Detroit. Yesterday, they lose Ragnow. He retires. They lost Zeitler in the offseason. Obviously, both of their coordinators. You've got Hutchinson coming back off what was just a horrendous leg injury. Where do you see the Packers in the NFC North in 2025? Again, a lot of question marks with some of the other competition. I think Detroit's maybe really taken a step back or maybe missed their window.
Yeah, it's a really hard division to understand because I don't think it's absurd to think the Packers can win it. And I don't think it's absurd the Packers can be the fourth team in the division because they are all kind of together in some regards. But I think the Packers have a really good shot at winning the division, yes. I think the Lions significantly regressed, and especially because it's really hard to keep being good when you lose both coordinators at the same time, and not because you want. I think the Eagles are a good example of that because they lost both coordinators after the Super Bowl. And they got both hirings wrong at first. Then they fired both guys, hired Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio last year, and then they got it right and went to the Super Bowl. But the first one was hard, and the second one was because they wanted to make a change. When you lose so many coordinators and assistant coaches, and not because you want, but because they're good and they move elsewhere, it's really hard to replace them at the same level. And there's all this talk about how good Dan Campbell is and maybe that he's better than Matt LaFleur. But his first experience with a different offensive coordinator, that wasn't as successful as it was with Ben Johnson. Obviously, the team wasn't nearly as talented as it is now. But I think at the same time, you have to understand that maybe even if Dan Campbell is a good head coach, he's not the offensive play caller. He's not maybe the offensive designer. He has a role within the offense, obviously, and he's a great leader for the team. But it will have an impact to lose a special coordinator as Ben Johnson is. And at the same time, it's not trying to be Homer or anything like that. But I think it's kind of a best case scenario if Ben Johnson isn't a good head coach. Because I think there's a real scenario where Ben Johnson is a good coordinator, but not a good head coach. Because they're two completely different positions. And if you watch the press conference, the first press conference from Johnson in Chicago, I don't know, that gave me some Adam Gase vibes, right? Because he's kind of a weird guy.
Love that you said that. Great comparison.
Gase was a really good offensive coordinator. He was a good offensive mind, but that doesn't always translate to being a good head coach, right? So if, for example, let's say Johnson was a good coordinator and he won't be a good head coach, it's the best case scenario for the Packers because the Lions lost a great coordinator and the Bears are with a bad head coach. It's early to say. Maybe he's a good head coach and Caleb will play well and all that stuff. But I think he gave me some weird vibes, and I'm not as confident that he will be a great head coach. As for the Vikings, I think they have a great coaching staff. I love Kevin O'Connell. I love Brian Flores. I think they have probably the best infrastructure for a young quarterback in the NFL because they have those great wide receivers. The offensive line is okay, and I think O'Connell is a great play caller, play designer, and leader to develop quarterbacks. If JJ McCarthy is bad under these circumstances, that's because he's really bad at quarterback because the circumstances are really good there. Honestly, for now, considering that maybe the bones of the Lions structure was the coaches and the offensive line, and they're losing Ragnar, they lost the guard. I think maybe the Vikings actually might be the most challenging team in the division for the Packers because I honestly I trust more O'Connell than I do Campbell.
Yeah, Kevin O'Connell is a heck of a head coach, and I'd say the same thing. And if you're now no longer a rookie quarterback, but a second year quarterback coming into that situation with that wide receiver group, that head coach, yeah, you have to feel pretty confident that they're going to be definitely competing for the North. And unfortunately, yeah, that horn, we don't want to hear a lot of it, but we might have to worry about it. I'm just hoping, maybe like you said, if he can't succeed with O'Connell, maybe he's just not the right guy. That's what we can all cross our fingers for.
Yeah, I think the Vikings have always been, I'll believe it when I see it for the Vikings, and I think that still is the way it is for me. I love what you said about Ben Johnson. That's exactly what we think. It's like, yeah, he's a great coordinator, but there's a question mark there as a head coach, and that's kind of we've seen that all over the league for so many years. That doesn't always translate. So I love that you reiterated that in our minds, at least.
Have you guys heard of the Peter principle? The guy's promoted until he's incompetent. The Peter principle.
And that very, very, very nice. Yes,
that happens in the NFL all the time.
Yep.
There's several examples of that, of guys that are good coordinators and they go to head coaches and they fail. Matt Nagy is as a recent example for the Bears, and sometimes it happens all across the position. Sometimes a guy is a good position coach and he's promoted to coordinator and he's not as good. I think Luke Getsy, that's now returned to the Packers, is an example of that. He was a good quarterbacks coach, was promoted to offensive coordinator, didn't pan out. So yeah, it happens all around the league. They're completely different job descriptions from offensive coordinator to head coach.
Yeah, and in Chicago too. I mean, obviously the head coach piece was not great for Caleb, but a lot of their non-success throughout last year was also on Caleb Williams and how he held that ball too long, the decisions he made. So we'll see if, Ben Johnson, as you mentioned, is a quarterback whisperer or not.
Wendell, you got something kind of exciting coming up. You've got week 1, Friday, September 5th, 7 p.m., Kansas City versus LA Chargers in Sao Paulo at Corinthians Arena again. So obviously last year's season opener was, I guess will be forever unmatched in Southern Americans, sports memory with the Packers versus Eagles debuting in the Southern Hemisphere. But are you excited to have another game in Brazil again this year?
Yeah, it's awesome, especially because two teams with two great quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes playing here is something unimaginable, and it's fun because Brazil is just an hour ahead of New York, of the New York time. It's a primetime game for the United States market too. It's a Friday night game, so it allows the NFL to put some great games here. Because if you look at the games in London, it's a lot of mediocre games. In both games here in Brazil were awesome. Packers and Eagles, now Chiefs and Chargers, great games, and that's because people were talking that maybe the Packers would play in Ireland this year with the Steelers, and it ended up being Steelers and Vikings, and that it would have been impossible to schedule a Packers versus Aaron Rodgers game that would be like at 10 a.m. in the United States time, in the Eastern time. So in Brazil, being a Friday night game, it allows the NFL to schedule great games here, and that's a pleasure to have these type of matchups here. The possibility to watch Mahomes and Justin Herbert, those guys, I think the NFL sees value in Brazil as a market for the league. because it's as a fast growing market for football. The NFL they're making tests and seeing how the market will operate, and they see Brazil as a third market in the world, just outside obviously the United States and Mexico, and then Brazil is the third market because obviously it's a huge country. We have 200 million people here, and it's a country super invested with sports and active on social media. So all that are factors for the NFL. So I think that's why they're betting so much in the Brazilian market, and you can see by the quality of the games that are happening here why and how much the NFL trusts Brazil as a future market for the league.
Yeah, I'm a little disappointed economically that the Packers didn't choose Brazil as one of those places that they could market to based on all the discussion we had last August and how many Packer fans are in Brazil. I really wish they would have done that, but unfortunately they have not.
Yeah, I would expect that too, but at the same time, I'm just glad that the Packers took any country because that's curious because I was writing a piece this week about ad policy and his challenges as the next president and CEO of the Packers, and the international expansion is probably one of his next and the first challenges that he'll have because Mark Murphy, even though he was a great CEO, especially for the internal market, I think he had a priority to build and to make it stronger for the Packers to be inside the community. That's why the Titletown district and all that. But at the same time, expanding the Packers brand throughout the world wasn't a priority for him. And while I understand why the Packers would want to build a stronger sense of community in Wisconsin, I think they're kind of losing money because it's not one thing or the other. You can do both at the same time. And there are so many fans around the world now, football fans. The NFL is expanding so fast, not only here in Brazil, but in Europe and in Australia. So I think that will bring huge opportunities for the Packers to make more money, to invest in Green Bay, in the city of Green Bay. So I think Ed Policy will have to lead that movement, and I think he has a big opportunity to do that. So even though I'm kind of sad that they didn't take Brazil for that global markets program, at least they have some countries in there to explore, and I think the Packers will probably have a good time doing that because it's super important, it's super valued for the franchise to do that.
Yeah, and the Packers as a franchise is such a unique franchise as being community owned. And I think it relates to a lot of people worldwide, and
Exactly.
get in every market you can. You're exactly right. I mean, they don't have to sell anything more to Wisconsin, Wendell. We're all bought in. It's a birthright. It is just what we do. We're doing this right now. Tay and I do this for fun. We have 9 to 5 jobs, and it's part of our daily lives every day in Wisconsin.
And just I was talking to Pete Dougherty before the game in Brazil because he was trying to understand how Brazilian soccer teams are operated. And for the most part, they are associations. So they don't have an owner either. So I think uh, in Europe is a little bit different because teams now have more frequently they have owners. But here in Brazil, having that sense of the community owning the team, that feels normal to us. And as you said, it relates when you watch the Packers and when you see how the team operates and how it is structured, you can see why the Packers are so popular here in Brazil and why they have the biggest fan base among Brazilian fans. That's because they see obviously the colors and it's green and gold like the Brazilian flag, but also when you try to understand exactly when you became a football fan. Now I'm trying to understand and see the teams and see how they are and try to choose a team to root for. It's natural, it's automatic to root for the Packers because of that.
Well, we hope Ed maybe changes his focus from Germany and Ireland and gets into the Brazilian market, no doubt.
Yeah, that would be
Well,
awesome.
yeah, that would be great. I mean, I think you're right, though. I think the NFL maybe now is looking to South America as an anchor point to go back repeatedly. I think, obviously, excuse me, they announced more international games than they ever have, so it's trending in that direction, and we hope that they, go down to South America more often. Right now, it's just this year, so we'll see about more. But I'm glad you guys have the opportunity.
There's been a report that Brazil will actually have maybe 2 games in 2026, and then will be one in São Paulo and one in Rio.
Oh, that'd be great. I mean, what's the population of Rio? It's a massive city.
Yeah, it's massive. São Paulo is like 22 million, and Rio is like something around 12 million. I think it's a huge city.
Wow, very cool.
Well, Wendell, we really appreciate your time coming on our podcast. We love your insight. We follow you on all the social media platforms. So we encourage our followers and listeners to go do that as well. You put out some really good content. All your articles are brilliant, I think, really poignant, and you have a lot of great opinions on the Packers. So we really appreciate you coming on the show. We'll leave it at that this time, but hopefully we'll have you back in the future.
Exaggerated words, my friend, but I'll take it. And I love to talk ball with you guys. I think you're super smart, super conversational too. So I really appreciate that, the opportunity to be here with you guys. And whenever you call me, I'll be here again.
And we, again, on my end too, very, very appreciative. Love the opinions, Wendell. Keep those opinions. Throw them out there. That's what makes you special. Thank you so much again for joining us today.
Appreciate you guys.
Take care, Wendell.